The stagecoach door swung open with a sharp crack, and the woman inside did not move. Dust rolled across the narrow street in thick waves pushed by a cold mountain wind that seemed to carry the promise of snow. The town of Silver Creek sat at the base of the Colorado Rockies, a collection of weathered wooden buildings that looked as though they had been forgotten by time itself. A general store with a sagging porch, a saloon with half its letters missing from the sign, a livery stable where horses stood with their breath fogging in the afternoon air. It was the smallest town Clara Whitmore had ever seen, and it was the farthest she had ever been from home. She gripped the edge of the seat so tightly her knuckles turned white. 3 weeks of travel had brought her here. 3 weeks of trains and stagecoaches and sleepless nights in boarding houses where every creak of the floorboards made her heart stop. 3 weeks of looking over her shoulder, certain that at any moment a hand would grab her arm and drag her back to the life she had fled. But no one had come. Not yet. The driver cleared his throat from outside. "Miss, this is Silver Creek. End of the line." Clara swallowed hard. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she could feel it in her temples, right next to the bruise that had not yet faded. She had covered it with powder as best she could, but in certain light the yellow and purple shadow was still visible. A reminder of her father's rage. A warning of what waited for her if she ever returned. She picked up her small carpet bag, the only thing she had brought from Boston, and forced herself to stand. The moment her boots touched the frozen dirt, the cold struck her like a physical blow. The air was thin here, sharp in her lungs, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. She had never been to the mountains before. She had never been anywhere before. 21 years of life, and she had spent all of them within the confines of Boston society, learning to play piano and embroider handkerchiefs and smile at men she found repulsive. None of that had prepared her for this. The town was nearly empty. A few men lingered near the saloon porch, watching her with open curiosity. A woman in a worn dress paused outside the general store, a basket in her arms. Everyone was looking at the stranger who had arrived on the afternoon stage. Clara clutched her bag tighter and scanned the street, searching for the man who was supposed to meet her. She did not know what he looked like. The advertisement in the newspaper had not included a photograph, only a few sparse lines of text. Man seeks wife. Mountain homestead. Must be willing to work hard. No experience necessary. Write to S. Callahan, care of Silver Creek Post Office, Colorado. She had answered that advertisement in desperation, writing by candlelight, the same night she had overheard her father selling her to a monster. The letter had been brief and honest. She was 21. She was educated. She was willing to travel anywhere as long as it was far from Boston. She had not mentioned why she needed to leave so urgently. She had not mentioned her father's gambling debts or the man who had paid $50,000 for the right to call her wife. The response had come 2 weeks later, delivered to the boarding house where she was hiding. 3 sentences in handwriting that was firm and precise. "Come to Silver Creek, I will meet you there. S.B." And so she had come. Because anywhere was better than what waited for her in Boston. Because a stranger in the mountains could not possibly be worse than Harlan Ashford and his cold, calculating smile. A door opened across the street, and an older woman stepped out onto the wooden sidewalk. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that had been weathered by years of mountain sun. Her eyes found Clara immediately, and something shifted in her expression. Recognition. The woman crossed the street with purpose, her boots crunching on the frozen ground. When she reached Clara, she stopped and studied her for a long moment. "You look just like your mother." Clara blinked. "I beg your pardon." The woman smiled, though there was sadness in it. "I am Martha Jenkins. Your mother and I were cousins. She wrote to me sometimes before she passed. She sent a photograph once, years ago. You have her eyes." Clara felt her throat tighten. Her mother had been dead for 6 years now, taken by fever when Clara was 15. Since then, Clara had been alone in that house with her father, watching him descend deeper into drink and gambling and rage. "I did not know she had family here," Clara said. She did not talk about it much. Martha glanced around the street, then lowered her voice. "Come inside. You look half frozen, and there are things you need to know before he arrives." Before who arrived, Martha took her arm gently but firmly. "Your husband." The words sent a chill through Clara that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She allowed herself to be guided toward the post office, a small building with a pot-bellied stove glowing in the corner. The warmth enveloped her as she stepped inside, and for a moment she could not do anything but stand there, and let the heat seep into her frozen limbs. Martha closed the door and turned to face her. "Sit down, child. I will make tea." Clara sat in a wooden chair near the stove, her carpet bag clutched in her lap like a shield. She watched as Martha moved about the small space, filling a kettle, setting it on the stove, measuring tea leaves into a chipped ceramic pot. "How did you know I was coming?" Clara asked. "He told me." Martha did not look up from her work. "Silas Callahan. He said he was expecting a woman from Boston, asked me to let him know when the stage arrived." Clara's heart began to beat faster. "What is he like?" Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down across from Clara, her hands folded in her lap. "He is not what you are expecting." "What does that mean?" "It means that when you see him, you are going to want to run." Martha held her gaze steadily. "Do not run, Clara. He is not dangerous. Not to you." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Why would I want to run? Because he looks like something out of a nightmare." Martha's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. "He is the biggest man you have ever seen. He has a scar across his face that would make most men cross the street to avoid him. He has been living alone on that mountain for 6 years, and he has forgotten how to talk to people. He is rough and quiet, and he will not smile at you or say pretty things or make you feel comfortable." "Then why are you telling me not to run?" "Because underneath all of that, Martha said he is the most decent man I have ever known. He gave me firewood last winter when my supply ran out, and he would not take a single cent for it. He saved a child who fell through the ice 2 years ago, nearly died doing it, and then disappeared back up the mountain before anyone could thank him. He has never raised his hand to anyone who did not deserve it." Clara absorbed this. "And those who deserved it," Martha's expression hardened. "There are men in this world who do terrible things. Silas has done terrible things to terrible men. He killed 5 of them years ago after they murdered his wife and daughter." Clara went very still. "He does not talk about it," Martha continued. "No one here knows the full story, but I knew his wife. Mary was her name. Sweet woman, gentle as a lamb. They had a little girl, Lily, 3 years old when it happened. What happened? A gang of outlaws attacked their homestead in Kansas. Silas was away selling horses. When he came back, everything was gone. His wife, his daughter, his whole life." Martha paused. "He tracked those men for 2 years, killed every one of them. Then he came here to the mountains, and he has been alone ever since." Clara sat in silence, processing this information. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, and she could see snowflakes beginning to fall. "Why is he looking for a wife now?" she asked finally. "I do not know." Martha shook her head. "I asked him once. He said he was tired of silence. He said he needed someone to talk to, even if he had forgotten how to do the talking himself." The kettle began to whistle. Martha rose to tend to it, and Clara stared into the glowing coals of the stove. She had come here expecting what? A lonely farmer, perhaps. An older widower looking for companionship. Someone ordinary, someone safe. Not a man who had killed 5 people with his bare hands. Not a man who had lost everything and retreated to the wilderness to nurse his wounds. She should leave. She should get back on that stagecoach and go back to Boston, where Harlan Ashford was waiting. Back to her father, who had sold her like cattle. There was nowhere else to go. Martha set a cup of tea in front of her. "You do not have to stay," she said quietly. "You can live here with me if you want. I have a spare room." Clara wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "If I stay here, they will find me. Who will find you?" Clara looked up at her. "The men I am running from." Before Martha could respond, the door opened. Cold air rushed into the room, carrying snowflakes that swirled and danced in the lamplight. And with the cold came a man. Clara had thought she was prepared. Martha's warning had given her time to brace herself, to steel her nerves, to remind herself that appearances could be deceiving. She was not prepared. He filled the doorway completely. Not just tall, but massive, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the entire world beyond. He wore a coat made of bear fur, heavy and dark, and beneath it, clothing that was worn but well-maintained. His boots were caked with snow. His face was half hidden by a beard as black as coal, and above it, a pair of eyes the color of winter storm clouds. And the scar. It ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone to his jaw, pale against skin that had been weathered by wind and sun. The mark of claws, of teeth, of something that had tried to kill him and failed. He did not look like a man. He looked like a force of nature. When pressed against his leg, stood a wolf. Clara stopped breathing. The wolf was large, nearly to the man's hip, with fur that was pale gray and white, like smoke and snow. Its eyes were yellow, ancient, intelligent. They fixed on Clara with an intensity that made her feel as though she were being weighed and measured by something that did not quite belong to this world. Miss Whitmore. His voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling down a mountainside. He spoke her name as though it were something he had practiced, something unfamiliar on his tongue. Clara forced herself to nod. Mr. Callahan. He stepped into the room, and even that simple motion carried weight. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots. The wolf moved with him, silent as a shadow. Martha stood. I will leave you two to talk. No time. His eyes did not leave Clara. Storm is coming. We need to leave now if we are going to make it up the mountain before it hits. Clara looked out the window. The snow was falling harder now, but the sky was still bright. How can you tell there is a storm coming 2 hours? Maybe 3. His voice carried absolute certainty. If we wait, we will be trapped here for days. She could stay here. She could take Martha's offer and remain in town in the spare room safe and warm. But safe was a lie. Safe meant they would find her. Safe meant her father would arrive with Harlan Ashford and his money and his men, and everything she had sacrificed to escape would have been for nothing. She stood, her hands trembling only slightly. I am ready. Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. He glanced at her thin coat, her impractical boots, her bare hands. You will freeze. Before she could respond, he shrugged off his massive bear fur coat and held it out to her. Clara stared at it. I cannot take your coat. You can, and you will. It was not a request. It was not quite an order. It was simply a statement of fact delivered in that gravelly voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep in the earth. She took the coat. It was so heavy she nearly staggered under its weight, and when she wrapped it around herself, she was completely engulfed. The fur smelled of pine and wood smoke and something wild, something untamed. Thank you, she whispered. He nodded once, then turned to Martha. I will send word when we are settled. Martha caught his arm as he passed. Be gentle with her, Silas. She has had a hard journey. He looked down at the older woman, and for just a moment, something softened in his expression. Something almost human. I know. Then he was moving toward the door, and Clara had no choice but to follow. The wagon was sturdy and practical, built to withstand the harsh mountain terrain. A single horse stood in the harness, a massive draft animal with a dark coat and calm, patient eyes. Silas loaded Clara's small trunk onto the back, handling it as though it weighed nothing. She climbed onto the wagon seat, the bear fur coat wrapped tight around her, and watched as he checked the harness one final time. The wolf had disappeared into the tree line, but she could see its pale form moving through the shadows parallel to the road. That is, Ghost, Silas said, following her gaze. He will not hurt you. He is a wolf, mostly. Silas climbed onto the wagon seat beside her, and the whole vehicle shifted under his weight. Found him as a pup, half dead in a trap. Raised him since. He lets you keep him. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not sure either of us keeps the other. We just stay close. He clicked his tongue, and the horse began to move. The wagon rolled out of Silver Creek, past the last few buildings, and onto a trail that wound upward into the mountains. Clara had never seen landscape like this. The forests of the east were tame, cultivated, controlled. This was something else entirely. Pine trees rose toward the sky like cathedral spires, their branches heavy with snow. Cliffs of gray stone jutted from the earth. The trail grew steeper, narrower, winding around hairpin turns that made her grip the edge of the seat. And the silence. She had not expected the silence. In Boston, there was always noise. Carriages and voices and factory whistles and the constant hum of civilization. Here there was only the creak of the wagon, the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, and the whisper of wind through the pine needles. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the most alone she had ever felt in her life. You are from Boston, his voice cut through the silence. Yes, never been to the mountains before. No, you will find it different. She almost laughed. Different. That was one word for it. They rode in silence for another mile. Clara tried several times to think of something to say, some way to break the tension, but every attempt died in her throat. He did not seem interested in conversation. He did not seem interested in her at all. He simply drove the wagon, his eyes scanning the trail and the trees and the sky, with the watchfulness of a man who had learned to see danger before it arrived. "Mr. Callahan," she said finally. "Silas. Silas." She swallowed. "The letters you wrote. They said you were looking for a wife." "That is correct." "May I ask why?" He was quiet for a long moment. The wagon rounded a bend and suddenly the view opened up before them, a vast expanse of valley and mountain and sky that seemed to stretch on forever. "I have been alone a long time," he said finally. "I am tired of it. But you do not know me." "No, I could be anyone, a criminal, a liar, someone who would rob you blind and disappear in the night." He turned to look at her then, and his gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not. How can you know that? The same way I know when a storm is coming." He turned back to the trail. "Some things you just know." Clara did not know what to say to that. She pulled the bare fur coat tighter around her shoulders and watched the snowflakes begin to fall faster. 2 hours later, the storm arrived. She had not believed him. The sky had been bright when they left Silver Creek, and even as the snow began to fall, she had told herself it was just a flurry, just a dusting, nothing to worry about. She was wrong. The wind came first, howling down from the peaks with a fury that nearly tore the coat from her shoulders. Then the snow, not gentle flakes, but sheets of white that reduced visibility to nearly nothing. The temperature dropped so fast she could feel it in her bones, a cold that sank through layers of clothing and fur and settled into her very core. Silas did not panic. He did not even seem concerned. He simply hunched forward, shielded his eyes with one hand, and kept the wagon moving up the trail. "One more mile," he said over the wind. "Hold on." Clara clung to the seat with frozen fingers, her teeth chattering so hard she could not respond. She had never been so cold in her life. She had never felt so small, so insignificant, so utterly at the mercy of forces beyond her control. And then, through the swirling white, she saw it. The cabin emerged from the storm like a ship appearing through fog. It was built of logs, solid and square, with a chimney that promised warmth and windows that glowed with the last light of day. A small barn stood nearby, and beyond that Clara could make out the dark line of a creek. "Home," Silas said. He brought the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, jumped down, and immediately began unhitching the horse. Clara tried to climb down after him, but her legs were so numb she nearly fell. Before she hit the ground, hands caught her. His hands, large and rough and impossibly gentle. "Easy." He steadied her until her feet were solid beneath her, then released her immediately, as though he knew that being touched was not something she welcomed. "Inside," he said. "Door is not locked. I will see to the horse." Clara stumbled toward the cabin, pushed open the heavy wooden door, and stepped into darkness. The cold inside was only slightly less brutal than the cold outside. Clara stood shivering in the darkness, her eyes slowly adjusting her breath, coming in visible clouds. She could make out the shape of a fireplace against one wall, and next to it a stack of split wood. Her fingers were so numb she could barely feel them, but she forced herself to move, to kneel beside the hearth, to remember the lessons she had learned from watching servants in her father's house. She had never started a fire in her life. She had never needed to. But she was not in Boston anymore, and if she did not figure this out, she would freeze to death. It took her 4 attempts. The kindling would not catch. The matches kept breaking in her trembling hands. By the time a small flame finally flickered to life, she was nearly in tears. "Good." She spun around. Silas stood in the doorway, snow covering his shoulders, watching her with those unreadable gray eyes. "I was not sure you would manage," he said. "You did." Clara turned back to the fire, feeding it more kindling, watching it grow. The warmth began to seep into the room, and slowly, painfully feeling returned to her fingers and toes. Silas moved about the cabin with efficient purpose. He lit oil lamps that hung from the walls, revealing the space around her. It was simple but well maintained. A large room with the fireplace at one end and a stove at the other. A wooden table with 2 chairs. A bookshelf filled with more volumes than she had expected. A ladder leading to a loft above. And on the far side of the room, a door. "That is your room," Silas said. Clara stood and crossed to the door. She opened it and found a small bedroom, perhaps 10 feet by 10 feet. A bed with a quilt made of fabric squares in blues and greens. A small window now dark with night and swirling snow. A wash basin on a stand with a clean towel beside it. And on the inside of the door, a lock. She stared at it. I put that in last month, Silas said from behind her. Figured you might want it. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small brass key. It glinted in the lamplight as he held it out to her. You keep it. Clara took the key. It was warm from his body heat, and it sat in her palm like something precious. Something that should not exist. You will not, she began, but she could not finish the sentence. She did not know how to ask what she needed to ask. No, his voice was quiet, steady. I sleep out here by the fire. I will not come into your room unless you invite me. Clara clutched the key so tightly it bit into her skin. I do not understand, she whispered. What do not you understand? Why would you do this? Give me my own room. Give me a key. We are supposed to be married. Silas was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved past her and began building the fire in the stove, preparing to cook. I needed someone to talk to, he said finally. I have been alone too long. I do not need you in my bed. I need you at my table. Clara stood frozen in the doorway of her room, the key pressed against her heart. No man had ever given her a choice before. No man had ever asked what she wanted, what she needed, what she feared. But then again, Silas Callahan was not like any man she had ever known. The first week was the hardest of Clara's life. She woke each morning before dawn, roused by the cold that seeped through the walls, no matter how high she built the fire the night before. The loft where she had assumed Silas slept was empty. He had taken to sleeping on a bedroll near the fireplace, giving her the privacy she had not asked for but desperately needed. Each day brought new challenges, new humiliations, new reminders that she was utterly unprepared for this life. On the first morning, Silas handed her an axe. Wood needs splitting, he said. I will show you once. Then you do it. Clara had never held an axe in her life. The weight of it pulled at her shoulders, and when she swung it at the log on the chopping block, she missed completely and nearly took off her own foot. Silas did not laugh. He did not mock her or make her feel foolish. He simply stepped up behind her, adjusted her grip, showed her where to aim. Again, he said. She swung again. This time she hit the log, but the axe bounced off without making a dent. Angle is wrong. Here. He guided her arms, adjusted her stance. His hands were large enough to wrap completely around hers, but his touch was careful, deliberate, always giving her space to pull away if she needed. By the end of the first day, her hands were raw and bleeding. She had managed to split 3 logs. Silas could have done 30 in the same time. He did not criticize her. He did not tell her she was doing it wrong. He simply bandaged her hands that night, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle, and said, better tomorrow. The cooking was worse. Clara had never cooked a meal in her life. In Boston, there had always been servants. Even in the boarding houses where she had hidden during her escape, meals had been provided. Silas showed her the basics: how to start a fire in the stove, how to boil water, how to prepare the simple foods that sustained life on the mountain. Dried meat, root vegetables from the cellar, flour for bread. She burned everything. The first meal she attempted was a simple porridge. It turned into a solid black mass at the bottom of the pot. The second was worse. The third, she somehow managed to start an actual fire in the stove, and Silas had to dump snow on it to put it out. You will learn, he said, scraping the ruined food into a bucket for the pigs. What if I do not? Then we starve. She stared at him. Was that a joke? He turned back to the stove, and she caught just the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth. It was a joke, she thought, maybe. The days blurred together. Clara learned to fetch water from the well without getting frostbite. She learned to feed the chickens that lived in a small coop behind the cabin. She learned to recognize the sound of the wind changing the smell of snow on the air, the 1,000 small signs that Silas read, and as easily as she had once read books. Her hands grew calloused. Her arms grew stronger. The bruise near her temple faded and finally disappeared. And through it all, there was Ghost. The wolf wanted nothing to do with her. Every time she entered a room, he growled low in his throat. Every time she approached Silas, he positioned himself between them, his yellow eyes never leaving her face. He does not trust you yet, Silas said on the 5th day. Give him time. How long? As long as it takes. That night, Clara could not sleep. The fire in her room had burned low, and rather than building it up again, she decided to sit in the main room where the larger fireplace still glowed with warmth. She did not expect to find Ghost there lying on the rug before the hearth. The wolf lifted his head when she entered, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. I know you do not like me, Clara said softly, but I am not leaving. Ghost did not respond. Of course he did not. He was a wolf. But something in his eyes seemed to shift. Something seemed to consider. Clara sat down in one of the wooden chairs, keeping her distance. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and stared into the flames. I do not know why I am here, she said more to herself than to the animal. I do not know if this was the right choice. I do not know if I can survive this life. She thought of Boston, of her father's cold eyes when he told her she would marry Harlan Ashford, of Ashford himself, the way he had looked at her like she was something to be consumed. But I know I could not survive that life either, she continued. So I suppose this is better, even if it kills me. She did not know how long she sat there talking to a wolf who probably did not understand a word she said. She talked about her mother who had died too young, about her father who had become a stranger after the funeral, about the years of being invisible in her own home, of being dressed and displayed and paraded before suitors who saw her as nothing more than a pretty face and a respectable name. She talked until her voice grew hoarse and her eyes grew heavy. When she woke the next morning, she was still in the chair by the fire. Someone had draped a blanket over her, and Ghost was lying at her feet. The wolf opened his eyes when she stirred, and for the first time there was no growl, no warning, just a steady, yellow gaze that seemed to say, I am watching you, but I am not afraid. Clara smiled. It was the first real smile she had managed since leaving Boston. The days grew easier after that. Not easy, never easy, but easier. Ghost began to follow her around the cabin, a silent shadow at her heels. He would lie beside her while she attempted to cook, watching her failures with what she could have sworn was amusement. He would press against her legs while she stood at the chopping block, warming her when the cold became too bitter. And Silas began to talk. Not much, not often. But sometimes in the evenings after supper, he would sit across from her at the table and answer her questions in his quiet, careful way. She learned that he had been a soldier in his youth, though he did not say where or when. She learned that he had built this cabin with his own hands, every log and every nail. She learned that he read Shakespeare and philosophy and poetry, and that the books on his shelf were his most prized possessions. She learned that his wife had been named Mary and his daughter Lily, and that he had loved them more than anything in the world. She did not ask how they died. She already knew enough to understand that some wounds never fully heal. On the seventh night, Clara retired to her room and stood before the door with the key in her hand. Every night since she arrived, she had locked it. Not because she thought Silas would come in. He had been true to his word. He never even approached her door unless she was in the main room with him. But the ritual of locking it had become important. It was proof that she had control, proof that she had choices, proof that this was her space, her sanctuary, her own small piece of the world. Tonight something felt different. She looked at the key in her palm, worn smooth from her constant handling. Then she set it down on the nightstand and climbed into bed without turning the lock. It was a small thing, a tiny gesture that no one would ever know about. But as she lay in the darkness, listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the main room, Clara felt something shift inside her. She was not safe here. Not entirely. There were men looking for her, men with money and power and rage. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she was not afraid. The door was unlocked, and she slept better than she had in years. 3 weeks had passed since Clara arrived on the mountain, and she had begun to understand that survival here was not just about splitting wood and starting fires. It was about learning a new language, the language of the wind and the snow and the silent man who shared this wilderness with her. Silas spoke more now than he had in those first days, though his words remained sparse and carefully chosen. He would answer her questions with a sentence or two, never more. He would explain things when explanation was needed, but he never wasted words on small talk or pleasantries. At first, this had unnerved her. In Boston, conversation was a weapon. People talked constantly, filling every silence with chatter that meant nothing and revealed everything. The absence of that noise had felt like a void. Now she was beginning to appreciate it. When Silas spoke, he meant what he said. There was no hidden meaning to decode, no subtle insult wrapped in polite language. Just truth, plain and simple. On the morning of the 22nd day, he found her in the barn, struggling to saddle the horse. You need to learn to ride, he said from the doorway. Clara turned a flush of embarrassment warming her cheeks. I was trying to figure it out myself. Silas crossed the barn in 3 long strides. The horse, a sturdy mare named Bella, nickered softly as he approached. Riding is not something you figure out from a book, he said. It is something your body has to learn. I have never been on a horse in my life, I know. He reached for the saddle she had been struggling with and lifted it as though it weighed nothing. With practiced efficiency, he positioned it on Bella's back and began tightening the straps. If something happens and I am not here, you need to know how to get down the mountain, he said. The trail is dangerous in winter. One wrong step and you go over a cliff. But if you know how to ride, you have a chance. Clara felt her stomach tighten. You think something might happen? Silas finished with the saddle and turned to face her. His gray eyes held hers with that steady intensity she was beginning to recognize. I think it is better to be prepared for trouble that never comes than to be caught off guard by trouble that does. He led Bella out of the barn and into the small clearing in front of the cabin. The snow had been packed down by weeks of foot traffic, creating a relatively flat surface. Come here, Silas said. Clara approached the horse, her heart beating faster. Bella was not as large as the draft horse that pulled the wagon, but she was still enormous compared to Clara's small frame. You mount from the left side, Silas explained. Put your left foot in the stirrup and swing your right leg over. Clara looked at the stirrup, which seemed impossibly high. She grabbed the saddle horn and attempted to lift her foot, but her skirts tangled around her legs and she stumbled backward. Silas caught her before she fell. His hands gripped her waist large and warm, even through the layers of her clothing. For one frozen moment, neither of them moved. Then he released her and stepped back. I should have asked first, he said quietly, before touching you. Something cracked open in Clara's chest, a feeling she could not name. It is all right, she said. I do not mind when it is you. He nodded, once his expression unreadable. Good. Now try again. This time when she struggled with the stirrup, he moved behind her and placed his hands on her waist again. Ready? Yes. He lifted her effortlessly, and suddenly she was sitting atop the horse, looking down at the world from a height she had never experienced. Hold the reins like this, Silas said, demonstrating with his own hands. Not too tight. Bella will feel everything through the bit. If you pull too hard, you will hurt her mouth. Clara adjusted her grip, trying to mimic what he had shown her. Good. Now squeeze with your knees to make her walk. Clara squeezed. Nothing happened. Harder, Silas said. She cannot feel you through all those skirts. Clara squeezed harder, and Bella took a step forward. Then another. Clara gasped and grabbed the saddle horn. Relax, Silas said, walking beside the horse. If you tense up, she will tense up. Horses can feel fear. I am not afraid. He looked up at her, one eyebrow slightly raised. Fine, Clara admitted. I am terrified. That is honest, he said. Being afraid is not weakness. Letting fear stop you is. They spent the next 2 hours in the clearing, Silas walking beside Bella, while Clara learned to start and stop, to turn left and right, to sit properly in the saddle without bouncing like a sack of potatoes. By the time they finished, Clara was exhausted and sore, but something had shifted between them. Some wall had begun to crumble. That night after supper, Clara sat by the fire reading one of Silas's books. It was a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, the pages worn soft from countless readings. She had been surprised to find it on his shelf, even more surprised to see the notes written in the margins and in Silas's precise handwriting. You studied Shakespeare, she asked. Silas looked up from the harness he was mending. Some, before I came to the mountains. Clara considered this. I am just trying to understand you. Why? Because we are married, she said, and I know almost nothing about you. Silas set down the harness and leaned back in his chair. His gray eyes studied her face in the firelight. What do you want to know? Everything, Clara thought, but she knew better than to push too hard. Where did you learn to read like this? She asked, gesturing to the book. These notes are better than anything my tutors wrote. My mother was a teacher, he said, before she married my father. She taught me to read when I was 4. By the time I was 10, I had read more books than most men read in a lifetime. And your father, he was a farmer. Good man. Hard worker. He could barely write his own name, but he made sure I had every book I wanted. Silas's voice carried a warmth that Clara had never heard before. A softness that spoke of love and loss and memories too precious to share easily. What happened to them, she asked. Fever. He said the words simply, without drama. Took them both in the same winter. I was 18. Clara set the book down. I am sorry, it was a long time ago. That does not mean it stopped hurting. He looked at her, then really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his gray eyes. Recognition, perhaps? Understanding. No, he said quietly. It does not. The blizzard came without warning. One moment the sky was clear and pale, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow. The next clouds rolled over the mountains like a great gray tide, and the wind began to howl. Silas was in the barn when the first flakes fell. He came through the cabin door with armfuls of firewood, his face set in grim lines. Bad one coming, he said. Worse than the last. How long? 3 days, maybe 4. He stacked the wood beside the fireplace with efficient movements. I am going to check the animals. Stay inside. Clara spent the next hour watching through the window as the world disappeared. The snow fell so thick she could barely see the barn. The wind screamed against the walls, finding every crack and gap in the logs, sending fingers of cold into the cabin. When Silas finally returned, he was covered in white. His beard frosted his cheeks raw from the wind. The animals are secure, he said. Now we wait. Waiting was harder than Clara had expected. The cabin that had seemed cozy now felt like a trap. The walls pressed in, the howling wind made conversation nearly impossible, and when it briefly subsided, the silence that followed was somehow worse. By the second day, the cold had become a living thing. It crept through the floorboards and the window frames. It settled into Clara's bones no matter how close she sat to the fire. That night, she woke shivering so violently she could not stop. Her blankets, which had seemed adequate before, were no match for this kind of cold. Clara. She opened her eyes to find Silas kneeling beside her bed. In the dim glow of the dying fire, his face was all shadows and sharp angles. You are freezing, he said. I am fine. Her teeth chattered so hard she could barely form the words. Silas disappeared and returned a moment later with his own bedroll and blankets. Without asking permission, he began layering them over her, tucking them around her body. It is not enough, he said. We need to share warmth. Clara's heart stuttered. I do not know if I can. He held up a hand. I am going to lie beside you, on top of the blankets, just to keep you warm. Nothing else. She wanted to refuse. Every instinct she had developed over years of learning to fear men's intentions screamed at her to say no, but she was so cold, and she trusted him. Somehow, against all reason, she trusted him. All right, she whispered. He stretched out beside her, still fully clothed, his body a wall of heat against her back. Even through the layers of blankets, she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Better, he asked. Yeah. Good. Sleep now. But she could not sleep. Not with him so close. Not with her thoughts spinning in circles. Silas. Yes. Will you tell me about them? Your wife and daughter? The silence that followed was so long, she thought he would not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely louder than the wind. Mary. Her name was Mary. She was the kindest person I ever knew. She used to sing while she cooked. Hymns, mostly. Songs her mother taught her. Clara felt his breath warm against her hair. Lily was 3 when she died, he continued. She had Mary's eyes. Blue like summer skies. She used to follow me around the farm asking questions about everything. Why is the grass green? Papa, why do chickens lay eggs? Why does the sun go away at night? Clara's throat tightened. She sounds wonderful. She was. What happened to them? Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Harder, colder. Outlaws. A gang that had been terrorizing homesteads across Kansas. They came while I was away selling horses. They took everything. Burned the house. Killed them both. He stopped. Clara felt his body tense behind her. You do not have to tell me, she said softly. I hunted them, he said. For 2 years, I tracked them across 3 territories. I found every single one. And I killed them. All 5. With my own hands. Clara absorbed this. She should have been horrified. She should have been afraid. But all she felt was a terrible, aching sadness. Is that why you came to the mountains? She asked. I came to the mountains because I did not know how to live anymore. He shifted behind her, and she felt his arms settle carefully across her waist. After I finished, after they were all dead, I realized that I had nothing left. No home, no family, no purpose. So I came here to disappear. But you did not disappear, Clara said. You sent for a wife, I know. Why? He was quiet for so long, she thought he had fallen asleep. Then so softly she almost missed it, he said, because even ghosts get lonely. Clara turned in his arms slowly, carefully, until she was facing him. In the darkness, she could barely see his features, but she could feel the warmth of his breath, the steady beat of his heart. I was afraid of my father, she said, for as long as I can remember. He hit my mother, every night almost after he had been drinking. She never fought back, she just endured. And when she died, I thought maybe things would get better, but they got worse. Silas did not speak, he simply listened. He started gambling, Clara continued, lost everything, the house, the business, the family name, and then he found another way to pay his debts. He sold you. Clara nodded. To a man named Harlan Ashford, a banker. Wealthy, powerful, respected in all the right circles. But there is something wrong with him, Silas. Something broken inside. He wanted me because I am pure. Because I have never been touched. Silas's arm tightened around her. He is obsessed with it, Clara whispered. The night before the wedding, I heard him talking to my father. He wanted a doctor to examine me, to verify. Like I was a horse he was buying, the bruise, Silas said. When you arrived. That was from your father, when I told him I would not marry Ashford. Clara, Silas said, and something in the way he spoke her name made her breath catch. No one will ever touch you like that again, not while I am alive. She believed him. God help her, she believed him. They lay there in the darkness, the storm raging outside their breath, mingling in the small space between them. Silas, Clara whispered. Yes. Will you kiss me? The silence that followed was electric. She could feel his body go still, feel the sudden tension in his muscles. Are you sure, he asked. I have never wanted anyone to kiss me before, she said. I have always been afraid of it, afraid of what it might lead to. But with you, I am not afraid. Clara, please. He moved slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His hand came up to cup her face, his calloused fingers impossibly gentle against her cheek. Tell me to stop, he said, and I will stop, at any moment. Just say the word. She did not say the word. His lips touched hers, soft at first, tentative. A question rather than a demand. She had expected to feel panic the way she always felt when men came too close. Instead, she felt warmth spreading through her chest like sunrise. She kissed him back. It was nothing like she had imagined. All her life she had been taught that intimacy was something to be endured, a duty to be performed with gritted teeth and closed eyes. This was different. This was gentle and sweet and achingly tender. When they finally broke apart, Clara realized her cheeks were wet with tears. Did I hurt you? Silas asked, alarm in his voice. No, she said. No, you did not hurt me. That is why I am crying. He wiped her tears with his thumb, his gray eyes searching her face. I do not understand. Clara let out a shaky breath. All my life I have been touched by people who wanted to take something from me. My father, suitors, Ashford. They all saw me as something to be used. No one has ever touched me like I mattered. You matter, Silas said. Clara, you matter. She kissed him again, harder this time, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate longing into the press of her lips against his. And for the first time in her life, intimacy did not feel like pain. It felt like coming home. The storm broke on the fourth day. Clara woke to silence. The wind had stopped howling and pale morning light filtered through the frosted windows. She was warm, wrapped in layers of blankets, and the solid presence of Silas beside her. They had not done more than kiss. Silas had held her through the long, cold nights, had kissed her until her lips were swollen and her heart was racing, but he had never pushed for more. He seemed to understand without being told that she needed time. That trust, once broken, had to be rebuilt slowly, carefully, like a house made of glass. Storm is over, Silas said, his voice rough with sleep. Clara stretched her muscles, protesting after days of inactivity. Do we need to check the animals? I will go. You rest. But she did not want to rest. She wanted to move, to breathe fresh air, to feel something other than these cabin walls. She followed him outside, and the world that greeted her took her breath away. The snow had transformed everything. It lay in drifts taller than she was, glittering in the morning sun like a sea of diamonds. The trees were coated in white, their branches bending under the weight. The sky was impossibly blue, so bright it hurt to look at. Beautiful, Clara breathed. Silas stood beside her, his breath fogging in the cold air. Yeah, he said, it is. They spent the morning digging out. The path to the barn had to be cleared. The animals fed and watered the cabin, checked for damage. By noon, Clara was exhausted and soaked with sweat despite the freezing temperature. She was inside warming herself by the fire when she heard hoofbeats. Her heart stopped. Silas was already at the window, his rifle in his hands. "Stay back," he said. "Who is it?" He did not answer. His body was tense, coiled like a spring ready to release. Then the tension drained from his shoulders and he set the rifle down. "It is Jenkins," he said, "Martha's nephew." Clara peered through the window and saw a young man on horseback bundled against the cold, picking his way carefully up the trail. Silas went out to meet him. Clara watched through the glass as they spoke, saw Silas take something from the young man's hand, saw his face go still. When he came back inside, he was holding a letter. "What is it?" Clara asked. Silas handed her the paper without a word. Clara read it, her blood turning to ice with every sentence. Silas. A man came to town yesterday asking about a girl from Boston. Red Hair Young arrived on the stage a few weeks back. He says he is her cousin looking for her. I do not believe him. He has the look of a hunter, not family. Be careful. I will alert the sheriff if I see anything more. Martha. Clara's hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. They found me, she whispered. Silas took the letter from her and read it again, his gray eyes scanning every word. Tell me everything, he said, about this man who bought you. Tell me everything I need to know. So she told him. She told him about Harlan Ashford, the banker with the cold eyes and the colder smile. She told him about the $50,000 her father had accepted, about the contract that treated her like livestock, about Ashford's obsession with purity and his reputation for cruelty. She told him about the rumors, the wives who had died, the accidents that were not accidents. By the time she finished, Silas's face was carved from stone. He will come, Clara said. He does not accept being refused. He will see this as theft. He will come for me. Then let him come. Clara stared at him. You do not understand. He has money, power. He can hire men as many as he needs. I do not care how many men he has. He could destroy you, destroy everything you have built here. Silas looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she had not expected. Not fear, not even anger. Certainty. Clara, he said, I have lost everything before. My home, my wife, my daughter. Everything that mattered to me was taken, and I survived. I rebuilt. I learned to live again. He stepped closer, his hands coming up to cup her face. If they come for you, they will have to go through me. And I promise you that is not something most men survive. Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. Why, she whispered. Why would you risk everything for me? You barely know me. I know enough. What do you know? I know you are brave, he said. Brave enough to run from a monster. Brave enough to marry a stranger. Brave enough to face every hardship this mountain has thrown at you without breaking. I know you are kind. You talk to ghosts like he is a person. You thank the chickens when they give you eggs. You said please to a horse. Clara laughed through her tears. That is ridiculous. No, Silas said. It is who you are. And I would rather die protecting that than live without it. He kissed her then, hard and fierce and full of promise. When they broke apart, Clara took a shaky breath. Teach me to shoot, she said. What if they are coming for me? I will not just hide behind you. Teach me to defend myself. Silas studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. It was the first real smile she had seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines, lighting up his gray eyes. All right, he said. We start tomorrow. The first time Clara fired a gun, she screamed. The noise was unimaginable. The kick nearly knocked her off her feet. She dropped the weapon in the snow and stood there shaking her ears, wringing her hands, aching from the recoil. Silas calmly picked up the rifle, checked it for damage, and handed it back to her. Again he said, I cannot. You can. Clara stared at the rifle in his hands, every instinct screaming at her to refuse, to go back inside where it was warm and safe, to let Silas handle the danger while she hid. But hiding had never saved her before. Hiding had not protected her mother. Hiding had not stopped her father from selling her. She took the rifle. This time she was prepared for the noise. The kick still hurt, but she managed to stay on her feet. The bullet went wide, nowhere near the target Silas had set up against a dead tree. Better, he said. Again. They practiced for 3 hours. By the end, Clara's arms were shaking from exhaustion and her shoulder was bruised from the recoil. But her shots were getting closer. The next day they practiced again, and the day after that. On the seventh day, Clara hit the target. It was not a clean shot. The bullet struck the edge of the wooden board, barely grazing the outline Silas had drawn. But it was a hit. Good, Silas said. Clara lowered the rifle, breathing hard. I did it. You did. He took the weapon from her and began reloading it. Now do it again, faster. She practiced until she could hit the target 3 times out of 5, then 4 times out of 5. She learned to load the rifle herself to clear a jam, to keep her hands steady even when her heart was racing. She learned that she was stronger than she had ever believed. On the 9th day after the letter arrived, they heard hoofbeats again. This time Clara did not hide. She stood on the porch beside Silas, the rifle in her hands, watching as a figure on horseback emerged from the tree line. Her blood went cold. She knew that horse. She knew that silhouette, the way the rider sat too straight in the saddle, the arrogant tilt of his head. Edward Whitmore had found his daughter. Her father stopped his horse a dozen yards from the cabin and surveyed the scene before him. His eyes took in the rustic building, the smoke rising from the chimney, the massive bearded man standing on the porch, and his daughter holding a rifle like she knew how to use it. Eleanor, he said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Cold, controlled, dismissive. You have led me on quite a chase. Clara did not lower the rifle. How did you find me? It was not difficult. He dismounted and took a step toward the cabin. A young woman traveling alone across the country leaves a trail, especially one as sheltered as you. Go back to Boston, Father. Edward laughed. The sound sent ice through Clara's veins. Go back. He shook his head. Child, do you have any idea what you have done? Harlan Ashford paid $50,000 for you. $50,000, and you ran off to marry some mountain savage. Silas shifted beside her, but he did not speak. He was letting her handle this. I am not your property, Clara said. I never agreed to marry Ashford. You did not need to agree. I agreed for you. You had no right. I am your father. Clara felt something crack inside her. All the years of fear of silence, of swallowing her own voice because speaking meant pain. It all came flooding out. You stopped being my father the night you hit my mother so hard she could not get out of bed for a week, she said. Her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. You stopped being my father when you drank away everything she loved. You stopped being my father when you sold me like cattle to pay your gambling debts. Edward's face twisted with rage. How dare you? How dare I? Clara stepped forward, the rifle raised. How dare you come to my home and demand I return to a life of misery? How dare you pretend you have any right to tell me what to do? This is not your home. This is a shack in the wilderness. This is my home, Clara said, and you are not welcome here. Edward's eyes narrowed. Ashford is coming, he said. He is gathering men. He does not forgive insult, Eleanor. If you do not come with me now willingly, what happens next will be far worse. Then let him come. Everyone turned to look at Silas. He had not moved from his position on the porch, but something in his presence had shifted. He seemed larger somehow, more dangerous. She is my wife, Silas said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. She stays. Edward looked at him with undisguised contempt. You think you can protect her from Ashford? He has money. He has power. He has hired guns. Silas met his gaze without flinching. And I have killed men for less than threatening my family. He let that sink in. Go back to Boston, Mr. Whitmore. Tell Ashford whatever you want. But if you come back here, if you bring him here, understand that you are bringing him to his grave. The silence that followed was absolute. Edward's face had gone pale. For the first time, Clara saw fear in her father's eyes. Real fear. You are making a mistake, he said finally. Both of you. No, Clara said. The only mistake I made was not leaving sooner. Edward mounted his horse. His hands were shaking. This is not over, he said. Yes, Clara said. It is. She watched as her father rode away, growing smaller and smaller, until he disappeared into the trees. When he was gone, she lowered the rifle. Her arms were trembling. Her whole body was trembling. Silas's hand came to rest on her shoulder. "You did well," he said. Clara turned to face him. "He will bring Ashford. You know that. I know. And you will fight them, even though you do not know how many will come." Silas's gray eyes held hers. There was no hesitation in them. No doubt. "I will fight for you," he said. "I will die for you if that is what it takes." Clara felt tears streaming down her face. She did not try to stop them. "I do not want you to die for me," she whispered. "Then I will try very hard not to." She laughed despite herself, despite everything. "Silas," she said. "Yes. Will you stand beside me?" When they come, he reached out and wiped the tears from her cheek with his rough, gentle thumb. "Darlin," he said, "especially when there is trouble." Clara kissed him, then there on the porch with the winter wind blowing around them, and Ghost watching from the doorway. For the first time, she was not running from her past. She was ready to face it. The days that followed her father's visit were the quietest Clara had ever known. Not peaceful, quiet in the way the world goes quiet before a thunderstorm, when the birds stop singing and the wind dies down and everything holds its breath, waiting for the violence to come. Silas spent those days preparing. He checked every weapon in the cabin twice. He reinforced the shutters on the windows. He dug a trench in the snow behind the woodpile, creating a defensive position with clear sight lines to the trail. He showed Clara where to hide in the forest if things went wrong, a small cave half a mile from the cabin where she could shelter until it was safe to move. "I am not hiding," Clara said when he showed her the cave. Silas looked at her with those steady gray eyes. "If I fall, you run. You get to this cave, you wait until nightfall, and then you ride to Silver Creek. If you fall, I am not running." "Clara, no." She stepped closer to him, her chin raised. "I spent my whole life running, running from my father, running from Ashford, running from everything that frightened me. But those days are over now. I will not hide while you fight alone. This is not about courage. This is about surviving. And what good is surviving if I lose you?" The words hung in the cold air between them. Clara had not meant to say them, had not even fully realized she felt them until they left her mouth. Silas's expression shifted. Something cracked in that stony facade, revealing the man underneath. The man who had lost everything once before and was terrified of losing everything again. "Clara," he said softly, "I love you." The words came out before she could stop them. 3 words she had never said to anyone. 3 words that had always felt like a trap, a surrender, a giving up of power. But standing here in the snow with danger approaching and an uncertain future ahead, they felt like the truest thing she had ever spoken. Silas was very still. For a long moment he did not respond. Then he crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms. He held her tight against his chest, so tight she could barely breathe, and buried his face in her hair. "I love you too," he said. His voice was rough, broken. "I think I have loved you since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach and looked at me like I was a monster but refused to run." Clara laughed through sudden tears. "You are a monster. I know, my monster." He pulled back to look at her face. "Yeah," he said. "Yours." They stood there in the snow, holding each other, knowing that these might be their last peaceful moments together. "I will not let them take you," Silas said. "I need you to believe that. I believe you. And if something happens to me, nothing is going to happen to you. But if it does," he pulled back his hands, cupping her face. "If it does, I need you to know that these weeks with you have been the happiest I have had since Mary died. I thought I was done living. I thought I was just waiting to die. And then you came and you burned everything you tried to cook, and you talked to my wolf like he was a person, and you made me remember what it felt like to be alive." Clara was crying freely now, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I am not going to let you die," she said. "I am going to stand beside you, and we are going to fight them together, and when it is over, we are going to live. Do you understand? We are going to live." Silas smiled, that small, rare smile that transformed his entire face. "Yes, ma'am," he said. They came at dawn. Clara heard them before she saw them. The sound of hoof beats muffled by snow, but growing steadily louder. The jingle of harnesses, the murmur of voices. She was already awake. She had barely slept, lying in the darkness with Silas beside her, counting the hours until sunrise. Now she rose quickly, pulling on her warmest clothes, checking the rifle Silas had taught her to use. How many, she asked, joining him at the window. Silas squinted through the frosted glass. 4 riders. Clara's stomach dropped. He only brought 3 men. He brought enough. The riders emerged from the tree line and stopped at the edge of the clearing. Even from this distance, Clara could recognize the figure at the front. Harlan Ashford sat tall in his saddle wearing a black coat that seemed to absorb the pale morning light. His silver hair was perfectly combed, his posture impeccable, his face a mask of cold civility. Behind him rode 3 men who looked nothing like him, rough, weathered, hard. Men who made their living with guns. Men who did not ask questions about the jobs they were hired for. Clara, Silas said. His voice was calm, steady. I need you to go to the back room. No, please. She turned to face him. We have been through this. I will not hide while you fight alone. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. Then something in his eyes shifted. Not resignation, acceptance. Stay behind me, he said. If shooting starts, get to cover. Clara nodded. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. Silas opened the door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle in his hands. Clara followed, positioning herself slightly behind him, and to the left, her own rifle at the ready. Ghost appeared from somewhere, materializing beside them like the phantom he was named for. His fur was bristled, his yellow eyes fixed on the riders with predatory intensity. Ashford surveyed the scene before him. His gaze moved from Silas to Clara to the wolf and back again. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the frozen clearing. Clara, my dear, you have led me on quite an adventure. Clara felt her skin crawl at the endearment. I am not your dear. No, Ashford's smile did not reach his eyes. And yet I paid $50,000 for the privilege of calling you whatever I wish. You paid my father, Clara said. Not me. I never agreed to anything. Your agreement was not required. Ashford dismounted from his horse with fluid grace. His men followed suit, spreading out in a loose formation. Your father signed a contract, a legally binding document that makes you for all intents and purposes my property. I am not property. The law would disagree. Then the law is wrong. Ashford laughed. It was a pleasant sound, cultured and controlled, and it made Clara's blood run cold. Such spirit, he said. I always did appreciate that about you. The others were so docile, so eager to please. But you, he tilted his head, studying her, you have fire. The others, my previous wives, Ashford's smile widened. Did you not hear? They died tragically. Childbirth complications. So common in these times. Clara felt sick. She had heard the rumors. She had not wanted to believe them. You killed them, she whispered. I released them from their purpose. They were no longer pure. They had served their function. Ashford's eyes glittered with something that was not quite human. But you, Clara, you are still pristine, still untouched, still worthy. Silas had heard enough. She is my wife, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute finality. She is not going anywhere with you. Ashford's gaze shifted to him, as if seeing him for the first time. Ah, he said, the mountain man. I have heard stories about you. They say you killed 5 men with your bare hands. They were not the first, and they will not be the last, I imagine. Ashford sighed as if the whole situation was merely a tedious inconvenience. Look, I am a reasonable man. I did not come here to cause trouble. I came here to retrieve what belongs to me. Hand over the girl, and we will leave peacefully. You have my word. Your word means nothing, Silas said. Ashford's expression hardened. The mask of civility slipped, revealing something ugly underneath. I was hoping to avoid unpleasantness, he said. But if you insist, he nodded to his men. Things happen very fast. One of the hired guns raised his rifle and fired at the cabin. The bullet struck the wall beside the door, sending splinters flying. Silas returned fire immediately, and the man crumpled to the ground with a scream. Get down, Silas shouted. Clara dove behind the water trough as more shots rang out. She could hear Silas's rifle cracking, hear the hired guns returning fire, hear ghosts snarling somewhere in the chaos. The barn. She looked up and saw one of Ashford's men running toward the barn with a torch in his hand. Fire. They were going to burn them out, the barn, but Silas was pinned down trading shots with another gunman who had taken cover behind a tree. He could not move without exposing himself to fire. Clara made a decision. She raised her rifle, aimed at the man with the torch, and fired. The shot went wide, but it was close enough to make him flinch. He dropped the torch in the snow where it sputtered and died. But the distraction cost her. She did not see Ashford moving through the chaos circling around the side of the cabin. She did not hear his footsteps in the snow. She did not know he was there until his hand closed around her arm and wrenched her to her feet. "Drop the rifle," he hissed in her ear. Clara tried to struggle, but his grip was like iron. He twisted her arm behind her back and pain shot through her shoulder. "Drop it or I break your arm." She dropped it. Ashford pulled her backward, using her as a shield, his pistol pressed against her temple. "Callahan," he shouted, "stop shooting or I put a bullet in her brain." The gunfire ceased. Silas emerged from behind his cover, his rifle still raised. His face was a mask of barely controlled rage. "Let her go," he said. "I think not." Ashford's breath was hot against Clara's ear. "I think I am going to take what is mine and leave. And if you try to stop me, I will kill her. Then I will kill you. And then I will burn this pathetic little homestead to the ground." Clara's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. She could feel the cold metal of the pistol against her skin, could smell Ashford's cologne, expensive and cloying. And underneath her fear, she felt something else. Rage. All her life, men had controlled her. Her father, her suitors. Now this monster who thought he could buy and sell human beings like livestock. She was done being controlled. Her hand moved slowly, carefully to the small knife Silas had given her. The knife she wore strapped to her thigh, hidden beneath her skirts. The knife she had almost forgotten about in the chaos of the morning. Her fingers closed around the handle. Clara Ashford crooned, "My darling Clara, did you really think you could escape me?" She did not answer with words. She drove the knife backward into his thigh as hard as she could. Ashford screamed. His grip loosened for just a moment, but a moment was all she needed. Clara wrenched herself free and threw herself to the side. A blur of white fur shot past her. "Ghost!" The wolf slammed into Ashford with all the force of 100 pounds of muscle and fury. His jaws closed around Ashford's gun arm, and Clara heard bones crack. Ashford fired wildly. The bullet struck Ghost in the side. The wolf yelped and fell. No, Clara scrambled for her rifle. Her hands were shaking, her vision blurred with tears, but she found it raised, it aimed. Ashford was trying to stand, his leg bleeding, his arm hanging at a wrong angle. He looked at her, and for the first time she saw fear in his eyes. "Put that down," he said. "You do not know how to use it." Clara pulled the trigger. The shot struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He collapsed into the snow, screaming. Clara stood over him, the rifle still aimed at his chest. "I am not your property," she said. Her voice was steady, calm, cold as the winter air. "I am not anyone's property. I am Clara Callahan, and I choose this life." Ashford looked up at her through pain-glazed eyes. "You will regret this," he gasped. "I have friends. I have power. I will destroy you." Clara shook her head. "No," she said, "you will not." Hoofbeats, more riders approaching. Clara tensed, expecting more of Ashford's men. But the figure who emerged from the tree line wore a star on his chest. The sheriff from Silver Creek with 2 deputies behind him. "Got word from Martha Jenkins there might be trouble," the sheriff said, surveying the scene. "She saw Ashford and his men riding through town at dawn. Sent her nephew to fetch us." His eyes took in the wounded men, the scattered weapons, the blood in the snow. Looks like she was right. Silas appeared at Clara's side. He took the rifle gently from her hands. "This man tried to burn my property and kidnap my wife," he said. "His men fired on us first." The sheriff nodded slowly. "I can see that." He looked at Ashford, still writhing on the ground. "This the banker from back east, the one who has been asking around about a runaway girl?" "It is. Well then." The sheriff dismounted and walked over to Ashford. "Harlan Ashford, you are under arrest for arson, attempted kidnapping, and assault." He pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "Anything you want to say?" Ashford's face twisted with rage and pain. "This is not over," he spat. "I will see you all destroyed. I will. Save it for the judge," the sheriff said. He hauled Ashford to his feet and handed him off to one of the deputies. Then he turned to Clara. "Ma'am," he said. "You all right?" Clara realized she was shaking. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and empty. "Ghost," she whispered. "Where is Ghost?" She found him lying in the snow beside the cabin, his white fur stained red. His yellow eyes were open, but his breathing was shallow, labored. "No, no, no." Clara dropped to her knees beside him. No, please. Silas knelt beside her. His hands moved over the wolf's body, searching for the wound. Bullet went through, he said. Missed the vital organs, I think. But he has lost blood. Will he live? I do not know. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. He saved me, she said. He saved my life. Then we save his. They carried Ghost into the cabin together, laying him on a blanket beside the fire. Clara stayed with him while Silas retrieved supplies. They cleaned the wound, packed it with bandages, tried to stop the bleeding. Hours passed, the sun rose higher, then began to set. Clara did not move from Ghost's side. Silas brought her food that she did not eat, brought her water that she barely sipped. He sat beside her in silence, his hand resting on her shoulder. As darkness fell, Ghost's breathing steadied. His eyes flickered, then focused. He looked at Clara and made a small sound, almost like a whimper. Hey, Clara whispered. Hey, boy, you are going to be okay. She could have sworn the wolf smiled. 3 days later, Ghost was on his feet. He was weak, moving slowly, but he was alive. He followed Clara around the cabin the way he always had a white shadow at her heels. She talked to him constantly, told him he was brave, told him he was the best wolf in the world, told him she would never forget what he had done for her. Silas watched from the corner, a small smile on his lips. You know he cannot understand you, he said. He understands enough. Clara scratched behind Ghost's ears. Do you not, boy? Ghost's tail wagged weakly. The cabin was quiet now. The sheriff had taken Ashford and his surviving men to Silver Creek. Word had come that they would be transported to Denver for trial. Arson, attempted kidnapping, assault. Ashford's money and connections might help him in Boston, but out here in the territories, justice worked differently. Clara did not expect to hear from him again. Martha came to visit a week after the confrontation, bringing supplies and news from town. She held Clara's hands and looked at her with tears in her eyes. Your mother would be so proud, she said. You have her courage. Clara hugged the older woman tight. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Martha promised to return often. She would not miss watching Clara build her new life for anything in the world. On the 4th night after the confrontation, Clara and Silas sat together by the fire. Ghost lay between them, his head resting on Clara's foot. I need to say something, Silas said. Clara looked at him. His face was serious, more serious than she had seen it since that first day in Silver Creek. We are married, he continued. On paper. Judge Harper performed the ceremony before you even arrived. But I never asked you, never gave you a choice. I chose to come here, you chose to run away. That is not the same thing. He shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable. I want to do this right. I want to ask you properly. He stood cross to a chest in the corner and retrieved something small. When he returned, he knelt beside her chair. Clara's breath caught. He opened his hand. In his palm lay a ring, simple silver with a small blue stone set in the center. It was my mother's, he said. The only thing I have left of her? Silas, Clara Whitmore. He looked up at her, his gray eyes soft in the firelight. I know I am not what you imagined when you answered that advertisement. I know this life is hard and lonely and nothing like what you were raised for. But I also know that you are the strongest, bravest, most stubborn woman I have ever met. And I love you more than I thought I could ever love anyone again. He took her hand. Will you stay with me, he asked. Not because you have to, not because there is nowhere else to go, but because you want to, because you choose to. Clara was crying again. She seemed to do that a lot around this man. Yes, she said. Yes. 1,000 times yes. Silas slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly as if it had been made for her. Then he rose, pulled her to her feet, and kissed her. It was different from the other kisses they had shared. Those had been tender, tentative, exploratory. This was a promise, a vow, a declaration. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Silas rested his forehead against hers. I never thought I would have this again, he said. After Mary, after Lily, I thought that part of my life was over. And now I am starting to believe in second chances. Clara kissed him again, softer this time. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. He pulled back and looked at her with something like wonder. My wife. Clara smiled. Your wife. That night, for the first time, Clara did not sleep in her own room. She lay in Silas's arms, warm and safe, and loved listening to the wind howl outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. She was not afraid anymore. Spring came slowly to the mountains. First, the icicles began to drip. Then the snow started to shrink, revealing patches of brown earth beneath. Then almost overnight, the world exploded into color. Green grass pushed up through the mud. Wildflowers bloomed on the hillsides. The creek, frozen solid all winter, began to flow again, filling the valley with the sound of rushing water. Clara stood on the porch watching the transformation. She still could not quite believe how beautiful this place was. After months of white and gray and the endless cold, the colors seemed almost impossibly vivid. Behind her, she could hear Silas working. He had started building an addition to the cabin a few weeks ago. A new room, he said, with a big window so she could read by natural light. She had not told him why she really wanted that room. Not yet. Ghost lay at her feet, fully recovered now, his white fur gleaming in the spring sunshine. He had become her constant companion since the confrontation with Ashford. He slept at the foot of her bed, followed her everywhere she went, and growled at anyone who came too close, except Silas. He had earned it. He had almost died for her. Clara rested her hand on her stomach and smiled. She had suspected for a few weeks now. The nausea in the mornings, the tiredness that crept up on her at odd hours, the way her body felt different, changed, alive with possibility. She had been terrified at first. She knew nothing about having babies, nothing about being a mother. Her own mother had died before she could teach her any of the things a woman needed to know. But then she had watched Silas, the way he cared for the animals, the gentleness he showed to Ghost, the patience he displayed when teaching her new skills. And she had realized that she was not alone, that whatever came next, they would face it together. Silas, he looked up from his work, sawdust in his beard. Yes. Clara crossed the clearing to where he stood. The new room was taking shape. The walls already framed the window opening, waiting for glass. That room, she said, the one you are building. What about it? I think it should be a nursery. Silas went very still. The hammer in his hand dropped into the sawdust at his feet. A nursery, he repeated. Yes, you mean I am pregnant. The silence.